an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Bly Manor. Season 1, Episode 1, The Great Good Place. In this episode, I cannot agree that everything is simply splendid. And I am agitated that I have to watch this show by myself. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. So this was a show, Ashleigh had actually commissioned this for something else that I wound up finishing early. And she was asking me about different things and whether I'd seen them in order to determine what she would use these episodes towards. And she asked me if I had seen what is the Haunting of Bly Manor Part 1 Hill House? Is that the one? And I had seen about half of Hill House, half the season. And I gotta admit, you guys, that I had a really hard time because everybody on that show looks the same. It's all a bunch of like blandly pretty, oval-faced, dark-haired, pale-skinned women. The men are slightly easier to tell apart, but it was a gripping show, like in its way, but I found it really hard to like keep straight who was who. And so, while I have only watched one episode of Bly Manor, I feel a lot happier with this show than I did with Hill House because it was like I couldn't look away from the screen and look back up again and keep in mind which sister was. I don't understand why one of them didn't have a bob haircut or something, like give them different hair at least. And, I know that that's a weird thing to bring up at the start of this episode, but I feel like I want to mention Hill House because I know how many people felt like Bly Manor was just kind of going back to that haunted house well, in a way. And Hill House people have said that they really loved the show, but they didn't like the ending very much, a lot of people. So, in a way, I actually prefer leaving it at my half season of viewing. And Bly Manor, I got a little, I was interested in watching it, but I was feeling almost like I had to finish Hill House before I could start another such similar show, and that's why I never watched it. And you guys, I don't know if it's come up that much on my other shows. I am a scaredy cat. It's really bad. I am, and it doesn't really happen too much with slasher movies because that's just a person, and I find that way more disturbing than actually scary. But when it's a spooky thing, I feel like I could just tear my own skin off my face. It's just so hard for me to keep looking at the screen. And so I am prepared to have looked away during episodes and only see the actual scary thing while I'm recording with you guys. I know that that's going to happen, that I'm going to have looked away because I can't help it. And I play the episode in the background while I'm recording. So y'all are going to get to see my reaction to the actual thing that I'm looking at because I'm not going to pause or go back to re-experience that moment. Ever. I promise I will not. I am in this house by myself watching this shit on a very windy day, by the way. So there's branches rattling against the house and shit. My cats are getting zoomy and running from room to room, almost making me hit the fucking ceiling. So, all that said, I am scared. So scared by the end of this episode. I feel like they did a really good job building dread. They got a lot of like character introduction done in a natural, organic way that feels reasonable, and everybody looks very different, so I can keep them all apart. Thank you for that also. And these kids really are a nice sort of balance between being like sort of spooky at the right times, but actually cute at other times. I feel like a lot of times shows and movies that have like the creepy kid thing tend to lean too much on a kid that looks creepy all the time. And therefore, when we're supposed to be feeling sort of affectionate or protective of them, it doesn't work because you can only see this like demon standing there, you know, even if it's not, but you still feel that way. So I really like that they managed to make, especially the little girl, has this vibe to her of sweetness. And she's obviously like extremely in control of herself and poised for her age, which feels a little strange. But she is also like lovable, and I can understand that feeling of like motherliness towards her. And yet when she turns the corner and we have the moment of the guys, remember this is the first episode, so I haven't got everybody's names set, so if you want to help me out, name of au pair, name of the two kids. When she turns around and picks that doll up off the floor towards the end and turns, and the little girl is sitting straight up in bed, I swear to God, I like my stomach like hit my shoes. Why is it that kind of thing is so frightening? Like somebody just being like bolt upright. When she comes into the room earlier too, and the little boy is like looking out the window and his back is dead straight, like he's fucking about to be on the bar and do some pirouettes. I was like, what? There's a feeling like something's in each of them when this happens. You know, I don't know if possession is part of the storyline, but I can feel like bits of that happening. It feels like each of them isn't entirely in control of themselves. And I don't really know what to make of that. Because when the kids are apologizing after they let her out of the closet, they seem sincere. They really seem like they feel terrible. And so I don't know what's happening. All right, let's start at the beginning here. So we start off, and this is sort of interesting actually, because very much not what I expected, but I always sort of like this trope of we're going to start off way in the future and then do that sort of bookend storytelling and go back and talk about what happened earlier. So we see this woman, and I feel like this is Dani, older. Later on, when she's telling the story, she says, it's not really my story. I'm not certain that's true, or if when she's saying that, she might be using a different metric than the one that I consider when you say it's my story. And this woman is in a hotel room, and there's just this song being sung, Oh Willow Waly, and it's really creepy, and it winds up being the song that we hear later as well, when she first arrives and she meets Flora. She gets up and she goes into the bathroom, and there is a what do you call it? There is a sink that has water like sitting in it. It doesn't look like there's a plug in the sink. It just looks like something is clogging it. There's water in it, and she just leaves it like that and walks away from it. Then she goes to the bathtub, and there's water in the bathtub as well. And it's just sitting there. And she it sounds like she reaches in and pulls the plug on that. So I'm like, why is she letting water sit around? What significance is this? And why is there a sort of sad expression on her face when she gets up in the first place. It feels like this is part of a routine that she doesn't want to be a routine, but there's just nothing to be done about it. This is just how her life is. And then we cut to her getting out of a taxi, and she's at this, this gorgeous sort of Tudor house. And we find out that there's a wedding taking place here, or it's a rehearsal dinner. My bad. The couple is going to be getting married the following day. And she shows up late. She's the last one at this rehearsal dinner. And the man giving the speech is sort of there's a sound to him. Like, when he sees her, he gets this look on his face, like, he's glad to see her and maybe a little surprised that she's here. And he talks a lot about how marriage can be really frightening. And basically you're choosing between running away from one another or choosing to watch one another die, which is the best possible outcome. Which, oh my God, Maxwell just said in the chat, the groom is Mark from The Room. I'm never going to be able to, like, I don't know how much he's going to play into the story, you know, but, like, that's just, okay. But yeah, when he said this about the couples thing, and like, that's the best possible outcome, I really was like hit hard with that. Owen and I frequently, probably more frequently than is healthy, talk about which one of us is going to die first. And I really need to be the one to die first. I cannot watch him die. I can't do it. At the same time, if I leave first, I'm inflicting pain on him. So I don't want to wish to die first either, because that sucks. So yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. So we go then to a cocktail hour in front of the fire, and they are talking about this ghost story that is in this house. There's like a nun who cries in the corners, apparently. And the groom had asked the bride if they could get a room there for right after the reception, just the one night, so that they could party and then just stumble upstairs and not have to get into a car or any of that. And she refused to do it because it was just too creepy. She just couldn't handle it. And honestly, this is one of those things where, and Jamie, if you're listening, Jamie has mentioned before how much she would like to live in a haunted house, or she has lived before, but you know, that is something that attracts her, and a hotel that was haunted would be something that she would rather enjoy, she feels. And I am definitely not of that persuasion. I am somebody who, you just tell me that there's ghost stories, and it doesn't matter if the place is actually haunted. I will fuck it up in my head enough for both of us. There's no need for there to be a ghost. I'll ruin my own life. No problem. That's what anxiety does. It's basically, anxiety is like thinking there are ghosts all the time. So she's the woman who remains nameless at this point. But like I said, I feel like she's Danny. She finally turns around and sits down and tells them all that she has a story. And immediately gets everyone's attention. And she's like, it's not a short story, though. And it's not my story. And then one of them had said earlier, any ghost story that involves a child is somehow worse. And she's like, all right, well, if that's true, how does 2 sound? And then we jump into this moment. I love how this starts, you guys, because it is such a sort of ordinary. It's a moment of just trying to cross the street that gets instantly turned so creepy with the reflection of the cab driving by. And what a way to establish things before we even get to the house, which is not expected. I am thinking, here's a very normal woman who has no baggage, and she's going to arrive at this place and get some baggage. But no. she has got some already that she is bringing along with her. And if there's already ghosts at the house, and she's bringing her own ghost, that's a ghost cocktail. What happens then when you shake that shit up and pour it over ice? Does it blow up? I feel like if this is Danny, the older woman, at least I can hope she actually, lives. I don't know, But she is on the street and checking her address, and it's obvious that, it's the, maybe 90s, it feels like. Her hair, she's wearing, some hair ornaments a little bit later that feel like it points to that period. And, I can't tell you guys, is this actress the woman who played, not Blair, but the other one in Gossip Girl, because she looks just like her, and yet every now and then she doesn't look like her at all. She's got one of those faces, and I couldn't tell if it is her and she's just had a little work done and it made her a little unrecognizable, or if it's a totally different person. She played Nell in Hill House. That's weird. Yeah, no, that's not. That's the only way I can enjoy those flash forward story openings, is if it's not 100% certain who wrote the the characters are. I can't walk in knowing who's safe. Blake Lively. Thank you, Chris. That's her name. Blake Lively and Leighton Meester. What names to be paired together in that show? So she goes up to this interview, and there's this really odd energy to the interview. She tries to be charming, and it's very clear that this guy isn't interested in being charmed. He is somebody who takes not only a serious view of life in general, but is uninterested in a way in what he's interviewing her for. This is a chore. And later on, when she's talking to these kids, the son asks, or I guess nephew asks, whether or not his uncle has asked about them. And she has to say, oh, you were all he talked about. And I mean, that's technically true, but not for the reasons that it sounds like when you say it. And he kind of he's very aggressive. He says something about how Miles is at home, and she wants to know why that is, because considering the time of year, he shouldn't be home from school yet. And he cuts off her question mid-sentence and pretends basically that she didn't even ask it, which obviously sends up some alarm bells for her, but she doesn't press the issue. She keeps note of it and just sort of puts it in her pocket to deal with later. And when they get to the end of this interview, he asks her, what's the catch? Because you are a young woman who is sort of probably at the prime of starting her new life, getting into that stable, settled period. And yet you're choosing this job abroad. You're from America, and you're willing to live there, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. What is the deal with that? And it's clear he hits the nail on the head. There is a very distinct reason why she's doing this. She has no interest in telling him what it is, but he isn't wrong, and she doesn't like it. So she decides, instead of answering, to ask the question back, and points out, I have seen this ad for an au pair for 6 months. It keeps popping back up again. So obviously, getting people to keep this job isn't easy. So what's the deal there? What is the catch? I think you're asking the right question, actually. Smash cut to her at a bar, looking through the classified section in the newspaper. So it's her assuming when she goes up to this guy later, I know I didn't get the job, she says. And she tells him that she thinks that they should have a drink together because that was the most awkward interview ever. And she has so many questions. And since she's not in the running for the job, maybe he can just tell her because she's dead curious. Pun intended. And he starts to like actually tell her some of this information. He, when she's asking like what the deal is with people not wanting to stick around, he says it's people's imagination. These kids' parents died, and we did have somebody last summer who was actually pretty good, a young woman, and the children really liked her. But I suppose she died. That's the way he says it. It was her own fault, to be blunt. What a way to say this. You know, like, and the way he says it, I wasn't even totally sure what he meant here until a couple lines later he says she took her own life. Because he's being so inspecific that I'm like, it was her own fault. What, did she step out in front of the car without looking both ways? Like, what does that mean? Saying it was her own fault about a suicide is a weird way to say that. And once we get the story later, we hear a version of what happened from Mrs. Gross. I say a version because it remains to be seen who's being honest. It remains to be seen who actually knows the whole story. I have no doubt we aren't getting everything right now. When Mrs. Gross explains later on, she says that what happened was this woman who was otherwise, as she puts it, like she was smart and ambitious and a kind-hearted person. And then there was a man, which is one of the only ways to take down a woman like that. And he got involved in her life, stole a bunch of money, I think from the household, if I'm not mistaken, took off, and she killed herself. And there's a sort of like assumption she killed herself out of despair because of him leaving her and having betrayed her, and maybe was using her the whole time. Who knows? And I'm just going to hazard a guess here that that's not exactly really what happened. I don't have any real theory beyond that. Obviously, living in that house did something else and probably had an effect. I don't know about this dude. I don't know if I want to say like, oh, he didn't steal anything and he didn't, you know, I won't go that far as to contradict that whole part of the story, but obviously there was something else going on. And the way that Mrs. Gross tells her the story feels to me like she believes that this is all it was. She feels like she's telling the whole truth. But I mean, how well could she know this woman? And there's also this weirdness. Mrs. Gross doesn't eat with the family. Every time that they sit down for a meal, she chooses to carry her food back into the kitchen, claiming she'll eat it later, or says she's already eaten. It's odd. If it weren't for the fact that I see her interacting with objects, I would wonder if this was a Sixth Sense situation and she was already a ghost, you know? But she's picking up mugs and drinking tea and shit, so clearly she's, like, able to interact with the world, and everybody sees her, so it's not like, you know, although I don't know, maybe that doesn't matter. But there's something. It's like, the only other thing that I could walk away with is she knows that Owen, so weird, by the way, when there's a character named Owen, it always makes me uncomfortable. Like, the only thing I could think is that she knows that Owen is poisoning all of the food. And he is in on it with her, and she's choosing not to eat it and saving herself. And that, like, why? You know, I don't feel like that. So I don't know what the fucking answer could be to that, but it was really noticeable, and it's clear that Danny is starting to be, like, a little bit weirded out by it. It's treated like she lets it go both times, but she's going to really start to notice it, I feel. So, yeah, this, when he explains to her, that this woman killed herself, and basically people sort of feel like the job is cursed, there's like a superstition now, it sort of makes sense to Dani. She seems to accept that explanation. And he asks her why she would ever want to do this. And she says that she had been a 4th grade teacher to a classroom of 25 children. And she would grow so attached and invested in these kids. And yet there was just not enough room or enough of her to really make any significant difference. She felt like she was just spread so thin that she couldn't really help anybody. And it got so frustrating and demoralizing that when she saw this ad for just 2 children, she felt like that at least was something that she could perhaps manage. And it would make an actual difference with just 2 children. And again, it's not the whole story. Obviously, there's something else that she's running from, as much as she says on the phone, I'm not running from anything, and it hurts me when you say that. We don't know who she was talking to then. But she says it, and it's a lie. Obviously, it's a lie. And whatever she's running from, it is... It appears to be literally following her around. Let's talk about this. Anytime that Dani looks in a reflective surface, there is a black man-shaped silhouette behind her. I believe it is male, masculine, with glowing white orbs for eyes. Incredibly creepy. And she can sort of get rid of it. At one point when she's in the bathroom, she kind of glares and smacks the mirror and it goes away. Because I genuinely, when I realized that it was all reflective surfaces, we're in her room when she's packing and she's pulling sheets down off of the windows, off of the mirrors. I kept being how does she do her hair and makeup and stuff if she can't even look in the mirror? That's how do you go to a job interview and feel like you can show your face, But because she can sort of get rid of it, I realized oh, okay, so it's just that she has to overcome this horrific thing every day and force it out so that she can just get on with her life. And it is unclear whether this is in her head or if it is a literal apparition following her. I tend to think it's in her head, that there is some sort of trauma that's causing this psychological manifestation rather than it being an actual ghost. And that is not to say that that makes it any less powerful or threatening at all. It doesn't matter in the end what it is. But at the same time, when she is giving Flora a bath, Flora's looking over her shoulder at something. Now, that house is clearly fucking chock full of ghosts. So it could be something else that she's looking at. But there is a sense that she is looking at the thing that Dani has seen in the mirror. And I can't tell you guys how well done I thought that scene was, in particular the bath scene. It is really easy to go for some silly tropes when it comes to the whole concept of children can see things that adults can't see. And I can't put my finger on it. I feel like what we could have seen from a worse actress than the little girl and a worse writer of the script would be something more overt. Maybe the little girl looks over Dani's shoulder and looks frightened, straight up frightened. Maybe she says something who is he? Or directly mentions that there is a person that she can see. There are a number of ways that you could do it where it would be much more obvious and much more playing towards the like outright scare. But instead, it's a really, really restrained scene where the little girl looks over her shoulder and sort of smiles and seems amused. And it's obviously like really weird and nerve-wracking to Danny, but the little girl doesn't seem upset by it. The thing that she gets upset by is the butterfly clip that's in Danny's hair. And she says it doesn't belong to you and is pretty aggressive about it. And when she looks over Danny's shoulder and laughs, she comes back to herself a little and says, never mind, it's actually fine. And really seems to mean it. So that's part of why I kind of wondered if what she saw wasn't even related to Danny's thing that she sees in the mirror. Because what would that have to do with a butterfly clip? Why would it matter what it said? It hasn't been around for this whole thing. At the same time, we don't know Danny's thing. And maybe it's like something personal attached to her that's like defending her. So this little girl gets mad at her and whatever it is like, hey, don't treat my girl like that. It's fine. You know, I don't know. But yeah, I just really liked, there's also the scene, cause she tells Danny to promise not to leave her room at night. And Danny doesn't listen. Well, white women, what are you doing? You're in a creepy, creepy house. Beautiful. Creepy. Don't lie. It's like the ass crack of dawn. The place is echoing and vast. You don't know your way around very well. And she's traipsing around in her fucking nightgown, looking like a ghost herself. And then she's just here to make a cup of tea in the middle of the night. I love the recurring theme, too, of how she doesn't know how to make a cup of tea. And how, like, you know, as a Southerner, well, she says as an American. And I have to put, like, that she is from the South. And not everybody from the South has accents. But that feels like what they're insinuating. Because just being American and acting like that means that you don't know what tea is false. That is patently not a thing. And I'm just going to sit here and feel a little bit cranky about that stereotype. Okay? Hashtag not all Americans. So, she goes and she's making this tea and leaning on, they have this gorgeous stove too, guys. Listen, this kitchen, it's not the best. It's rather cavernous. But I will tell you that I have looked at stoves like this to see how much they cost and like exact models like this. Do you know how much a stove like that costs? We're talking upwards of $10,000. I don't know why. I don't know what the stove does if it gets up and tap dances for you, but that's how much they cost. So she's standing there and she's sort of noticing this like atmosphere, which whether a place is haunted or not, in the middle of the night is going to feel like that. She doesn't turn any lights on. Again, white women. So she's standing there with the tap dripping and hearing like this creaking sort of vague scrabbling noise and walks into the darkened hallway. You can only see her silhouette. It's such a tense moment. Like when I'm talking about scenes that I'm going to look away from you guys, here's one. I said that didn't happen this episode, but I lied. I looked away here. I looked up and away and up and away and up and away because I kept thinking something was going to jump out and I didn't want to like fall for it, but I also didn't want to miss anything. And she's staring down the hallway and as far as we can see, there's nothing there. And then the fucking teapot starts whistling. Oh. Oh, what a low trick that is. a low-down, dirty trick. And she goes running back, finishes making her cup of tea, and goes up to her bedroom. And she is scolded for this the next day, because Flora knows she got out of bed when she promised that she wouldn't. And this thing with the tap dripping feels very significant to me because of the way the episode started, with her alone in this hotel room and there being like water in the sink and in the bathtub. And we don't nothing actually happens when she looks down the hallway. But after she walks back with her tea, we see somebody turn and watch her. And they seem to be wearing this like black cape with like a hood. No, thank you. It was odd too, because the hood, it almost looks like it comes to a point or something. And so it looked like a knife blade or something sticking out. It took so long for me to understand what it was that I was seeing. And there's almost a sense like that it's coming out in front of the hood from their face, like a plague doctor mask kind of thing. I have no idea. I don't know what to say about that. So next day, like I said, Flora says that she's very cross with her. I don't want you to leave you promised that you wouldn't leave your bed, and you did anyway. And Flora's like, how can you even know that? And Danny says, if you don't, she'll see you. And when she asks who, she says, the lady in the lake. And when she says the lady in the lake, Miles says, Flora, with this tone of voice, like he is trying to stop her from blurting something out that she shouldn't. Like she shouldn't even have said that much. And he has a very angry look on his face. And he's holding something in his hands, and he comes up to them, and it turns out to be a spider. And poor Flora screams and runs away. And Danny is like, I know what you're trying to do, kid. This isn't my first rodeo. A lot of kids have tried a lot of things. But the truth is, it's not that easy. I am pretty brave. And she actually takes the spider out of his hands and proves the fact that, this does not bother her, and he's going to have to try a little harder. He seems to take her at her word later on in the episode, unfortunately. Calls her bluff. And it's a weird moment. When she says that, she was trying to scare her, he says he wasn't trying to scare her. And that makes it sound like he means he was trying to scare his sister, but I don't know that either. And she continually, throughout the episode, tries to prod him to explain what happened at school that caused him to be sent home. And never gets an answer. He doesn't want to confide in her. She's like nudging every time she talks to him, but she doesn't want to push too hard. And recognizes that she's going to have to earn his trust a little bit more before he will open up like that. And this is when he asks, like, did our uncle talk about us? And she says that that's all he did and has to sort of lie. And then we get the narrator chiming back in and mentioning how the children's moods seem to swing all over the place with no apparent reason behind it. As they're walking back to the house, Danny looks up and there is a man standing on the parapet, wearing a turtleneck, it looks like. He's dressed in what feels like early 90s or 80s clothing, and I have to assume this is the children's father, maybe? He looks the right age. He is in the wing of the house that's closed off. It just feels like that's likely who this is. We don't know, I don't think. I don't feel like we've seen, because the whole, like, opening credits for this show is the portraits that are hanging up, and, each character has their portrait, and there's this weird imagery of, like, their eyes disappearing. And I don't know that the parents would have had portraits in the house, or if there are any photos of them around, because if it is their dad that she's seeing, then I'm assuming that she's going to find that out sooner rather than later. And guys, that would freak me out. If I saw somebody and it really seemed like they were not a ghost. It wasn't even like that. It seemed like there was a person in the house, and that's weird. And then you see a photo of them later and it's like, oh, they died, 2 years ago. Don't like it. No, thank you. But we haven't gotten there yet. She hasn't seen any, she doesn't know who this is. She brings it up when she goes to eat lunch and nobody knows who she's talking about or saw the guy. And eventually she goes up into that wing of the house herself and she finds this little stick figure doll. And this is something that continually comes up. When she first arrives, she asks if she can get out of the car and walk the rest of the way to the house, which is a weird instinct. It's fine, but it is strange. And that's when she first runs across Flora, who is playing by the edge of the pond/lake. And she has a stick figure in her hands that she leaves at the edge of the lake. And it feels like an offering or a ward. What would one call that? Like a talisman, I think is the word that Mrs. Gross uses later. And clearly dolls are like a big thing for Flora. We see her playing house later. And there's lots of strange little figures in the house that are very spooky looking that don't look like people, because like the doll that's sort of meant to be Danny, it looks like a very tiny Barbie doll. It looks like a person. And the others are like just wrapped in like scraps of rag or like a tiny sack with just like a face vaguely drawn on it. And it really gives the impression, especially because of the size of the dollhouse, that there's like, this is a miniature model of the actual Bly Manor, and she has positioned people in the house, what am I saying? Ghosts in the house where they actually tend to appear. So she puts that doll that is meant to be Danny into bed, and behind that doll is this bigger doll with wild hair, black dress. There's this other dude who's like in what looks like a huge overcoat and gloves and a hat. There's this one that has like a baby's head and is in like this weird gown. And this all feels like it's very significant. There's also there's a hooded figure with like a beard that seems to be in the sort of dining room area. And then there's somebody that looks like they're in an abandoned attic. Another sort of masculine looking one with a hat near the stairs. And somebody behind the like, what do you call it? Dresser in one of the rooms. By the time we go around, it looks like there's maybe 10 of them altogether that feel like they represent ghosts. And then as she's cleaning up, Danny notices a doll that's under the bureau, and she goes to pick it up because she's just trying to like tidy the room. And this one doesn't have a face at all and is real freaky looking. And she looks over at Flora, who is very agitated, and says she stays there with a forcefulness to her voice that clearly makes it's like a weird moment, because it clearly makes Danny uncomfortable, but Danny knows that these kids have like lost people. And so there's a feeling to her of sympathy. Like she knows that she's getting creeped out, and she's really trying to push past that because she recognizes that this is her own thing that she needs to get over. And these are just children who have gone through trauma and they need to be taken care of, you know, and that begins to sort of go away because, I mean, I won't say it goes away, but there is a feeling to her of like, I feel like almost frustration later because she wants to still feel that, but now they feel like a threat a little bit, you know? So the next day when they're getting ready for bed and she has the whole talk with, in the meantime, she goes to the parapet, she finds the doll, she's looking outside and over like the garden and sees the, chapel that's like out in the garden and there's candles lit and there's a sense of like her being worried that maybe there's mischief going on. But when she goes in, Mrs. Gross is in there with candles lit for the dead. And, this is when Mrs. Gross explains that their parents died 2 years ago. I don't think that she ever says the cause of death, if I'm not mistaken. And that's also a little concerning. It feels very vague. I don't really know why anybody wouldn't actually explain that, but she glosses right over the how to talk about the next thing that happened, which is the death of their au pair. And I guess that makes sense from like a perspective of a person who was actually around for that part when they weren't necessarily around for the first part. But, yeah, this whole scene I thought was well done. I like the actress playing Mrs. Gross. She feels very, like simultaneously grounded and spooky, which is not an easy thing to pull off, you know? And, after their talk, we jump ahead to that evening when she's having to get them all ready to go to bed. And this is the moment where Miles is standing at the window, just staring blankly at this like ship. And I don't know if that's how their parents died. The ship is a model ship on his windowsill. And there are ships all over the wallpaper as well. So it feels like there's an aspect of that. But I don't know. And when she says, it's time for bed, he says, is it? I shouldn't think so. And she says, no more games, Miles. And he turns to her and says, do you like games, Danny? And I'm like, what is this? Is he Jigsaw? What's happening? And he just keeps on like being creepy until his sister literally yells from the other room, stop being weird, Miles, which I found very amusing. She goes to tuck Flora in and shows her the doll that she found on the parapet and basically tells her that she appreciates what it is that Flora's doing. She's just like, you know, I know that what it is that you're attempting here, and it's a really like kind use of your imagination. And I hope that you aren't just trying to keep us safe, but you also keep yourself safe, that you put that first. And at this point, Flora says, you really are, you know. And she says, I'm what? And Flora says, perfectly splendid. And when she says that, it just feels like she heard somebody in the room say it and is repeating it. The way that she says, you really are, you know. Like, that feels like somebody said it first and she's like agreeing. So at this point, she turns to leave and go to bed herself. And that doll is standing up in the middle of the room. The one that had been under the bureau. It's standing up. I want to mention that again. Pretty much right in the path of where she walked earlier. So how she didn't kick it the first time that she walked to the bed doesn't really work. That feels like that doll got up and walked around. To me, not a fan. And she picks it up and she turns to the bed to simply ask Flora where she wants her to put it down. And Flora is sitting straight up in bed, staring at her, very agitated. And Danny's obviously caught off guard by this. Kind of tries to be cool. Asks, where do you want me to put her tonight? In the house or under the dresser? And at this point, Miles comes into the room. He looks at his sister. She looks at him and gives him this barely perceptible blink and nod. And he says, there's an electric fan in Flora's cupboard. I cannot sleep without it, I'm afraid. And she says, that's right, my cupboard. And it just feels like this is, they both have a signal for when this is an emergency situation and we need to do something right now. And when he's like, I can't sleep without it, he says, I'm awfully sorry. And he says, I'm sorry several times in just asking her to go into the closet at all. And there's a hesitation when Danny goes in. You see the two of them come to stand behind her, looking in with a sense of sort of, we know we are going to have to do this thing and neither of us really wants to do it. And eventually they do slam the door shut and lock the door. They are so creepy before they do it too, because they're both standing there looking into the closet. Like, it's understandable how unnerved Danny is. And she thinks that this is just a prank. I think her kicking that doll meant something, and they had to go and mitigate the damage, and they knew she wouldn't let them. And that maybe if they did go do the thing, she'd see something and they can't let her see things. So they're keeping her in one place temporarily so that they can get this done and she won't know. And it'll just seem like they were misbehaving, but she won't understand what's actually going on. And what they don't know is that, first of all, she has this thing that follows her around. And she turns and sees that in the closet because she's in there with a giant mirror. And also, I think she might be a little claustrophobic or have some trauma associated with having been locked in someplace. Because her entire self begins to just shred apart. She had been so cool about handling the spider thing and trying to make a big show about how brave she was and that it was really going to take more than that to get to her. And then it's just, all of a sudden, it's like a snowball. She starts getting agitated. She's really no, really open the door. And then all of a sudden she's screaming, crying, pounding on the door with a sense of such complete hysterical fear that it isn't actually appropriate in the context of what's happening. I understand being really agitated, especially considering how long it seems she's left in there. But the reaction that she's having is different than what I think an average person would have, which would be more anger, right? You would just be enraged that these kids would pull this kind of shit. But it really feels like she's barely holding it together at all. And once we see her, first, when she is, the thing that sort of sends her over the edge with this anxiety, that really seems to make it turn into full-on fear, is seeing that thing in the reflection, which leads to her eventually just knocking down the mirror. And she winds up huddled up in the corner in the fetal position when we see her a little bit later. And yeah, the way that she starts breathing, there's something happened to her, clearly. And I don't know if they know about that. I don't feel like they do. It doesn't feel like this is a directed attack. It just feels like a means to an end for them. And like I said, they leave her quite a while. We see a whole, the pan goes out through the house and we're looking at the whole manor from the outside, giving the impression that it's been a good hour before they finally opened the door and let her out. And they had said, like, they didn't let her out because they couldn't find the key. And obviously the key is in the lock. Like, it's right there. But it is one of those... It's just an awful moment where she comes out. The kids do seem actually sorry. And Danny is incredibly freaked out and trying to not completely lose it. Not only in front of them, but on them. Let's be real, you know. And they try and say that it was an accident. And you can see this sort of incredulity come over her face, that like they would try and lie like that. When she saw what happened, it wasn't an accident. I was looking right at you as you purposefully closed the door. I know what it was, kind of thing, you know? And as she's leaving, the camera pans over and we see that doll back under the bureau. And she's standing outside their bedroom door and she's sort of like trying to get a hold of herself. And I think she got so creeped out that walking down this dark, deserted hallway is a little bit spookier than she would normally feel it was. And she looks down and she sees some wet footprints on the ground. Muddy footprints. And they look like bare feet, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong. No, those are bare feet. And she thinks, like, did they go outside? Is that what happened? And she goes downstairs to follow them, and the front door is wide open. And the footprints are going outside. So something or someone came into the house. But it is only one set of footprints. If both of them went outside, why, and they both, like, you know, why would there only be one set of footprints? Unless only one of them went into the water or whatever. Or it wasn't them. And she goes outside and looks around into the garden. And then she turns around and looks at the manor. And each of the kids is, or no, not each of the kids. There are two figures that I initially took to be the kids. Is it the kids, though, that are standing at the windows? Because they look so pale and like sepia toned that I was like, are those ghosts? Is she seeing ghosts? Or is it straight up just the two kids? I can't tell. But they're just staring at her, even though she sort of just tucked them in. And it is such a freaky moment because we know that it feels like the two of them are pure evil trying to gang up on her. Like, if things weren't done as subtly as they are, it would seem very obvious that we were watching, like, baby serial killers. But there is a ritual feeling to this, you know, combined with the whole thing with the dolls. I think that they are trying to help somehow, and it just doesn't look like that from the outside. So that is the end of the episode. It cuts from there to credits, and I swear to God, you guys, because this was like an hour long, and a lot of times shows like this run about 45 minutes, and I gotta say, it felt an hour long. I was in such a state watching it because I got so freaked out. And I just, like, by the time credits rolled, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, I can't take anymore. It's part of why I have a hard time watching spooky movies, too, because, like, they're long. And they stick with me, you know? I mean, I watched, what is the one? Midsummer. Oh, God, guys. I couldn't shake that movie for, like, a week and a half. So let's see. In the chat, Mrs. Gross was in an episode of Doctor Who. Oh. Also, this felt like the Snowman episode at the beginning of Clara's run. Oh, I see what you mean by that, Chris. Ashley says, just double checked. Yeah, it is the two kids out of bed. Okay, cool. And Natalie says, I would love for you to rewatch it and find the hidden ghosts. Yeah, I was kind of keeping an eye out for that, Natalie, while I was watching, because while I was watching, I mean, just now while I was like scrolling through the episode to talk about specific scenes, because there are moments where the camera goes out of focus in a way, or they have the background very out of focus and the person is very close to the camera, that makes it feel as if we are purposely not showing you something that is definitely in the frame. Like there's that is how the show is filmed all the time, is like it's framed in such a way that it captures two things, but the focus is only on one of the things, and it's up to you to notice the other thing. And despite the fact that it's framed like that and the focus is done like that, and I'm paying attention to it, I still don't always see things, you know? Coupled with the fact that some of these are clearly, like, the ghosts, I mean, are obviously weirdly shaped, so I'm not sure if I would recognize them anyway. Like, the thing that was watching her when she went and got her cup of tea had that, like, weird sort of beak or hood or whatever it was. So if I saw that in the background, I don't think I would know what I was looking at. I don't think it would, like, you know, register. And then Ashleigh says there was one episode that I thought was particularly well done. Oh, well, we'll see. So I'm going to wrap up, you guys, but thank you all so much for coming. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this. I am very excited. I am very nervous. This is the first horror type thing that I've really covered for the show. I have a book that I've been covering that's horror, but it's really different when you're reading versus when you're watching. And especially because that's like a very fantasy horror versus something like this, which is grounded in real life. So yeah, I think that there's going to be another episode shortly, actually. Let me take a look. January 19th. So I think Tuesday of next week. And the next, up until episode 6 is commissioned. I don't know how many episodes there are. Okay, Ashleigh is saying that there are 10, that she thought she had commissioned all 10. It might just not have been updated by Candace. So I'll check on that. But 10's about what a normal Netflix run is, so that makes sense. All right, well, I'm really excited I get to watch the next one so soon, and I will see you guys next week with the next episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.